Welcome to the Stories of Starting podcast. I'm Heather Boyd. As a self-employed artist for the last 30 years, I'm fascinated with people's passions and creative projects. In this series, we discover how people like you have started new projects by thinking outside the box, going with the flow, and tapping into their childhood imagination.
So hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Stories of Starting, and today is take 2 of my interview with Rob Cloney. So Rob, introduce yourself please.
I'm Rob Cloney. I'm an English and drama teacher at St. Thomas High School in Pointe Claire, Quebec. I'm also a storyteller with Montreal Storytellers Guild and the Ottawa Storytellers, and I guess I'm many things outside of that as well, but maybe we'll get to know as we talk.
Exactly. So Rob, I always like to start the interview with telling people how we met. So we met when our daughters were in grade 1 at Christmas Park School, and they became fast friends and went through elementary school together. And then over the years, you know, we get together as families. You guys came up to our cottage, and then you and your wife Nadia opened up the art gallery, the Viva Vida Art Gallery in the Pointe Claire Village, at which I have a lot of my artwork there as well, and I do workshops and stuff. So we've been friends for a long time now.
We have, yeah.
That's it. So something I wanted to get you to tell us a little bit is about sort of your background. So I know you studied history, and then you worked in the summer doing plays and different things like that. So just give us a little lowdown on your background.
Yeah, so that's it. When I was studying, I had a great opportunity to do some theater work, and then I started doing stuff in school, and then I started getting summer jobs doing stuff, and one job in particular kind of led to my storytelling career, I suppose, which was when I worked at King's Landing, which is a historic village in New Brunswick. And what happened there was we were doing plays all summer, but occasionally some of the cast members would be off, and we wouldn't have a show. So I was asked to step in and do some songs and stories, and didn't realize I was being a storyteller. I just thought I was entertaining people. And years later, I turned out, oh no, that's in fact what I was. So.
Very cool. I love that. So you studied in New Brunswick, was it?
New Brunswick and Nova Scotia.
And Nova Scotia, and then you lived in Brazil for a little while.
Yeah, we were there for about 5 years.
Yeah, and you had a language school there?
Yeah, Nadja's more the entrepreneur than I am. She's the one who really had designs on opening the school. And the gallery as well. I help her out, but it's her gallery, and the school was both of ours, although I also worked at an international school while I was there.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, we had that school, and when we left Brazil, we sold it, and as far as I know, it's still running. Yeah.
Okay, that's so cool. And I know the first time we spoke, we touched on the idea of storytelling in education. So when you were teaching at the school, and then later you're teaching in the high school, like right now you're teaching in high school. So how would you say that you incorporate storytelling in your teaching?
Well, I think storytelling is at the core of learning all the time. I mean, as human beings, that's what we do. We tell stories, and but I often like to give examples or create hypothetical situations, and often stories are a way to help students kind of hone in on the important ideas that you want to have them carry away, whether it be a moral or a situation. But also, storytelling is a great way for students to learn how to communicate with other people, to stand up, in a formal presentation. Well, that's one thing. But knowing that you can make contact with individuals and that you can control the way your audience responds by the way you present material. So the more opportunities you have to do this, the better you become at it. And also, I think for students, especially the younger students, it's a lot of fun. But honestly, I've done workshops for adults as well, and they tend to enjoy it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember one particular time when we were at my cottage, we had an evening where we were all sitting around the fire, and it was your idea you suggested, well, why don't we do some storytelling? Why don't we go around the circle and everybody take a turn telling the story? And I thought, what a great idea, and such a great way to bring people in and to create conversation in a sort of not a small talk type of way, but actually like telling interesting stories.
Yeah, for me, you mentioned that, and I didn't actually recall doing that, but it sounds like something I would do. I grew up going through scouting, and storytelling was always happening at the fire as well as singing songs.
Yeah.
And I have over 35 first cousins just on my mom's side, so
wow.
And I'm the third oldest, so there was lots of younger kids in my family as well. So that was something that was just always done. It was just something that was, I guess, second nature.
Oh, that's amazing. So as a family, you wouldn't sit in front of the TV and at the dinner table, you would be more like storytelling around the dinner table.
Yeah, I guess, and also at extended events. I mean, especially when I was younger, a teenager. You know, the adults would be having their party, and there'd be always lots of kids around, and sometimes I would just take them aside and tell a few stories, but also, I have cousins that would share stories with me as well.
Yes.
It was just a way of communicating, So.
Yeah. No, I just love it, and I find, especially like as our parents are getting older, I find it so interesting engaging them in telling stories about their youth, and it's always so interesting to listen to people speak so passionately about their own personal stories.
I love listening to my mom tell stories about when she was a kid, and Nadja's father was a fantastic storyteller. We'd be at the dinner table and he'd have us all entranced.
Yeah.
And sometimes we had heard the story already,
Yeah.
but it was a joy to listen to the second time.
Yeah.
He was such a colorful narrator. And my mother's, she's just funny, and the stories are usually humorous, so it's always a lot of fun. Yeah.
And it's fun to see how stories evolve, because it's true, it's rare that we become tired of hearing these stories. It's like when we go see live comedy, and the comedians will tell the same jokes over and over, but often they'll put like a different spin, or depending on the audience, the story or the joke will change depending on the reaction of the audience, which is really interesting.
Well, and that's very much a feature of stories, that you don't memorize a story, you just know the story and you tell the story, and over time, depending on how somebody reacts to a different part, you might tend to develop that one a little more, and something might wither away because it's not getting any response, and you're not necessarily doing this consciously, but you're just interacting with the audience, and if they're responding, I suppose you're responding to their response, and the story changes all the time. And sometimes you make conscious decisions to add something to a story.
Yeah, it's true, and that's an interesting sort of tip for public speaking too. Is what they say is, when you're confident with your material and you know it very well, you can get up and do a talk and improvise depending on the reactions of the crowd and what have you. And so in a sense, especially for people that are nervous about public speaking, that's a good way to look at it, as a sense of storytelling. You're basically up there telling a story to your viewers.
Yeah, and often just finding two or three faces in the audience, and if you're communicating with them, there are different kinds of storytellers, and I suppose each of us brings our style. I like to be very one-on-one with my audience, in the sense that I like to make contact with different people, and I want them to feel like I'm telling them the story.
Yes.
So I tend to be very casual in the way that I tell a story. Some people are much more structured, and it's really about finding what works for you and what you're comfortable with. And but I just like natural.
That's cool. And I love that you have two completely sort of different markets. You have the kids, and an example of that, the first time I saw you storytelling for kids was at the summer camps at the Viva Vida Gallery, or at the birthday parties, and basically you were using storytelling as a tool to keep them occupied between sessions, which was interesting.
Yeah, we transitioned, so while we're putting away the artwork and getting the tables ready for cake, the storytelling just keeps them engaged, and but for them it's also just another feature of the party.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, different storytelling organizations I belong to, some really focus on adult audiences, and some really focus on, children's events, or some will do both. And but there are some storytellers who are not comfortable telling to children, and some who are not comfortable telling to adults. And I tend to like both. And I suppose the way I tell differs a little bit from, I tend to be more physical the way I tell a story to a children's audience. In terms of animating and stuff. But Oh, that's cool. And I love the way you can plug the kids' names into the story as well. It's like these custom stories type of thing. Yeah, if you can, if you really want a kid engaged, make the story about them, and they're in. They'll buy.
Well, that was really fun. A couple of weeks ago, we went to see you in Ottawa at the Storytelling Festival. So tell us a little bit about the festival, the organization.
So that's through the Ottawa Storytellers, and they do that annually at the Centerport Library. I've been involved only 2 years myself, but they have a program for younger kids. I think it's 4 to 6 or 4 to 7. And then the other age group would be 7 till 12, I suppose. And so they have different storytellers come in. It's about a 25-minute set, and you come in and you get to share some stories that can be built up around a theme. I tend to, I have a little thing where I use a little bag of rocks, and each rock represents a story. So that really tends to get the children involved, because they want to be the one to pick the story. And even though they're picking out a stone, as far as they're concerned, they've bought into the fact that stone is a story. So that's a lot of fun, even though really I have my program done. But it just makes it more interactive for the kids. But it's a great opportunity. It's a great way to help not only prepare kids for listening to stories for the rest of their lives, but it allows adults to come back and hear some of those stories and maybe some new stories to help them remember that storytelling isn't just for kids. And we spoke about in the first interview about sort of the different functions of storytelling, and I was mentioning that because as an entrepreneur, people use storytelling all the time, like to tell their own personal brand story, to tell the story of the product. And I have a friend that actually gave a whole workshop on storytelling for entrepreneurs, and it was super interesting, all these concepts that really to get people engaged in what you're doing and is to tell a story. Well, it's true. That's how we communicate. And if I'm going to sell you a car and somebody else is going to sell you a car, and there's not a huge difference, the difference is going to be the connection that you've made with that person. So if you have a story to share and that person feels they know you better, that makes sense to me.
Exactly. And even just sort of the functions of these social media platforms, they call them stories. Instagram stories, Facebook has stories, YouTube has stories now, and so that's what it's all about, just people telling like little 15, 30-second clips about stories.
And it really speaks to the different kinds of stories. Like here in Montreal, we have, in addition to the Montreal Storytellers Guild, we also have a great personal story format called Confabulation, and there people go and they share personal stories. They're always true stories.
Nice.
And they are usually built up around a theme, and it's very popular, and it's really exciting because you get lots of different people to come in, and you're listening to somebody share a part of their life. And sometimes they're really funny, sometimes they're really sad, but they're always really interesting.
That's so interesting, because I used to go to something, it doesn't exist in Montreal anymore, but it was called Mo Mondays. And I believe it still happens at different places in Canada. It's sort of like a national thing, maybe international, I'm not sure. But basically it stands for Motivation Monday, and it's people, mostly entrepreneurs, but not just, people getting up, and there's like half a dozen, and they tell their story. So often it's like one of these, the hero's journey story, of how they overcame obstacles to get to a certain point either in their career or in their life. And I love that. It was such a great event and such a cool opportunity because you would listen to people's stories and then you could network afterwards with the other people.
Well, that's the great thing about these organizations. So, for example, the Montreal Storytellers Guild, we have a swap every second Thursday, the second Thursday of every month. And those are, it's rather informal. You can go just to listen to stories, or you can go and if you want to tell a story, and it's a very warm and forgiving group, and it's an opportunity for you to develop as a storyteller. Confabulation, you get, when you submit a story, they'll help you. They'll help prepare you to tell your story in a way that will work for that format. And then, but then there are other great storytelling opportunities. For example, we just had the Intercultural Festival, which is a huge storytelling festival here in Montreal.
Right.
I believe it's every second year.
Okay, cool.
Confabulation actually had a show as part of that this year. I think there was something like 90 different shows going on. So it's a big thing. A lot of it's in French. But there's still a lot of English shows in the program as well, and the quality of that show is fantastic.
Oh, that's cool. And then what was that one day we spoke about last time? It was at McKibben's Pub. They had a one day
that was
event.
the Bloom Festival.
Bloom's, okay.
Yeah,
Bloom
so
Festival,
they just happened to have a storytelling event, and I was asked to go and share a couple of stories there. So yeah, for Bloom's Day.
So that's it.
Yeah.
And then of course the articulation show that has been happening at the Viva Vida Gallery for a while.
Yeah, that's a great opportunity for people to share poetry and stories, and again, it's always built around a theme. That's every year. I can't remember what month.
Yeah, well, I'll put up some clips to some of those videos as well.
Yeah, you can actually find those all on YouTube.
Yeah, that's fun. So yeah, there's all kinds of opportunities available for people to do storytelling, and it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, it's again. Because I like to take advantage of more events, I have what's available to me here in Montreal, but I also, as I said, I go to Ottawa because they have a really active storytelling community there as well, and so I take advantage of some of the events that they have there as well. So it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and maybe you'll tell us a story now.
Sure, I will. Yeah.
Sounds good.
So this is a story that takes place a long time ago, and it involves an old beggar woman who used to go from town to town, and she would go looking for food and for something to drink to help replace her energies so that she could continue her travels. And one day she came to a town, and it wasn't a large town, it was a small town with really only one main road lined with houses, and she decided to start at the first house. So she walked up and she knocked on the door. And when the door opened, there was a young woman there, and she looked and she said, "What do you want?" The old beggar woman, she looked at her and she said, "I'm sorry to trouble you, but I wondered if you might have a bit of food or something to drink to help me replenish my energies on my travels." The old woman looked her up and down. She said, "I have nothing for you." Well, she closed the door in the old woman's face. But this wasn't the first time this had happened to this old woman, so she simply moved on to the next house. And again, she knocked on the door. And when the door opened, it was an older man. He said, "Yes, can I help you?" She said, "I'm sorry to trouble you. I wondered, would you have some food or something to drink, something to help me replenish my energies in my travels?" And the old man said, "I'm sorry, I have nothing here for you today." And again, he closed the door in her face. Now, the old woman, she went from house to house to house, both sides of the street, looking for something to eat or drink, just to replenish her energy so she could continue on her travels. But not one person in that town had anything for her to eat or drink. And when she got to the end of the road, she had passed all the houses, she sat down on a large stone just to rest before she continued her travels. And while she was sitting there was this big hubbubaloo down at the end of town. And she looked down, and what should she see but a man coming riding into town on a big black horse, and he was wearing a long flowing black cape on his back. And the old woman watched as all the windows and doors of the houses flew open and the heads came flying out to see what was going on. And just as quickly the heads disappeared. And moments later, the people came running out of the houses, carrying meats and cheese and fruits and breads and wine, and tripping over each other to be the first to get to that man on the horse. Well, you can imagine that old woman was not impressed with what was going on. So she decided to find out what was happening, and she made her way back to the beginning of town. And when she got there, she waited for the crowds to disperse, and slowly they did, and soon she was the only one standing there. So she tugged on his leg, and he looked down from his horse and he said, "Yes, can I help you?" And she looked at him, she said, "Are you the king?" He said, "The king? No, I'm not the king." "Why do you ask?" She said, "Well, when I came into this town, I went from house to house to house looking for food or something to drink, and nobody had anything for me. But you come riding in on this horse with your fine cape, and people are tripping over each other to get you food and drink. And so I'm wondering, who are you? What did you do to deserve to be treated like this?" And the horseman, he looked down at the old woman. He said, He said, "That." He said, "My name is Story. And whenever I come into town, everybody wants to come and see me. Everybody wants to hear what I have to say." "But grandmother," he said, "what about you?" He said, "Who are you? And what have you done to deserve to be treated like this?" The old woman looked up at him and she said, "That." She said, "Well, my name is Truth. And whenever I come to town, nobody wants to hear what I have to say. Nobody wants to hear me." Now, the man on the horse, he looked at her for a few moments and he said, "You know, I have this big black horse. You see this horse?" And she said, "I do." And he said, "And you see this long flowing black cape that I'm wearing?" "Yes, I see it." He said, "How about if you climb up onto the horse and hide under this cape? And then you could travel with me. And whenever somebody gives me food, well, then you'll have something to eat. And whenever I get something to drink, well, you'll have something to drink." The old woman thought for a second. "Yeah, that's a good idea." So she climbed up onto the horse, got in behind the horseman, covered herself in the cape, and they set off. And they started to travel from town to town. And as far as I know, they're still traveling together today. Which is why, whenever you hear a story, there's always a little truth hidden in behind.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Stories of Starting. If you would like to inspire others with your story, big or small, be sure to reach out via storiesofstarting.com. Until next time, always remember, your story matters.